To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Victor Carlson had built his life on 3 pillars: honor, family, and unwavering loyalty. At 34, the Navy SEAL had served 4 tours overseas, earning commendations that filled a box he never opened. His calloused hands could dismantle an enemy or cradle his 6-year-old daughter Emma with equal precision. Emma was his world, a bright-eyed girl with Victor's determination and her mother's auburn hair. She'd greet him at the door after every mission, arms outstretched, shouting, "Daddy's home," in a voice that could heal any battlefield wound. Victor had met Della Palmer 8 years ago at a military charity gala. She was volunteering, serving drinks with a smile that seemed genuine. Della was beautiful in an understated way: shoulder-length auburn hair, green eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a warmth that drew people in. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a local nonprofit, spoke passionately about helping others, and seemed to understand the demands of military life. "I know you'll be gone sometimes," she'd said during their 3rd date, her hand finding his across the restaurant table. "But I also know you'll always come back to us." They married 18 months later. Emma arrived 2 years after that, and Victor believed he'd found his perfect life. Della seemed to embrace her role as a military wife, attending family readiness group meetings, organizing care packages for deployed soldiers, and maintaining their home with military precision when Victor was away. Helen Palmer, Della's mother, had initially been skeptical of Victor. A sharp-tongued woman in her 50s who'd raised Della alone after her husband's death, Helen worked as a bank manager and prided herself on reading people's characters. She'd eventually warmed to Victor, appreciating his dedication to Della and his provision for the family. "He's a good man," Helen would tell her friends at Bridge Club. "Takes care of my daughter and granddaughter proper." Victor's neighbor, Naomi Dawson, was a retired teacher in her 60s who'd lived next door for over a decade. She'd watched Emma grow from a toddler to a precocious 6-year-old, often babysitting when Victor and Della needed an evening out. Naomi had a gift for seeing through facades and had become like a grandmother to Emma. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, perfect for raising a family. Victor had chosen the house specifically for its proximity to the base and the good schools. He'd installed a security system, motion lights, and even hidden cameras around the property, old habits from his military training. Life had a rhythm. Victor would deploy for 3 to 6 months, come home for equal time, then deploy again. During his home periods, he was completely present, coaching Emma's soccer team, taking family camping trips, teaching her to fish at the lake behind their house. Della seemed content, involved in the PDA, maintaining her nonprofit job, hosting dinner parties for other military families. But something had shifted in recent months. Victor noticed small changes. Della's phone was always face down. She seemed distant during their conversations, and she'd started working late more frequently. When he'd asked about it, she'd attributed it to increased responsibilities at work. "They're expanding the program," she'd explained, not quite meeting his eyes. "More fundraising events, more administrative work. You know how it is." Victor didn't know how it was. He also knew when someone was lying to him. But with his deployment to Afghanistan scheduled for the following week, he'd pushed aside his concerns. Della had never given him reason to doubt her loyalty. She was the mother of his child, his partner, his anchor to civilian life. The night before his deployment, they'd made love with unusual intensity. Della had clung to him afterward, her face buried in his chest. "I love you," she'd whispered. "I love our family." "I love you too," he'd replied, stroking her hair. "Take care of our girl while I'm gone." "Always," she'd promised. As Victor boarded the transport plane the next morning, Emma's tear-streaked face pressed against the terminal window. He carried that promise with him. He had no way of knowing it would be the last truth Della would ever tell him. Chapter 2. Foundations Crack. 3 weeks into Victor's deployment to a forward operating base near Kandahar, Della Palmer Carlson stood in her kitchen, staring at her reflection in the window above the sink. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, hair perfectly styled, makeup applied with practiced precision, wearing a dress that cost more than she should spend on such things. She was preparing for dinner with Stephen O'Donnell. Stephen was everything Victor wasn't: smooth where Victor was rough, charming where Victor was direct, present where Victor was deployed. At 36, Stephen worked as a senior account executive for a marketing firm downtown, drove a BMW, and wore suits that were tailored to perfection. He'd entered Della's life 6 months ago when his company had contracted with her nonprofit for a major fundraising campaign. Their first meeting had been professional. Stephen had impressed Della with his understanding of her organization's mission, his innovative ideas for expanding their donor base, and his attention to detail. But it was during their third planning session, over drinks at an upscale hotel bar, that professional boundaries had begun to blur. "You're remarkable," Stephen had said, his blue eyes locked on hers. "The way you advocate for these causes, the passion in your voice when you talk about helping families. Your husband is lucky to have someone so dedicated." Della had felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. When was the last time Victor had called her remarkable? When was the last time anyone had noticed her passion for anything beyond meal planning and school pickup schedules? "He's deployed a lot," she'd found herself saying. "It's lonely sometimes." Stephen had leaned closer, his hand covering hers on the table. "Loneliness is a terrible thing to waste." The affair had started with text messages, innocent at first, then increasingly personal. Stephen would send her good morning messages when Victor was halfway around the world. He'd ask about her day, remember details about Emma's school events, compliment her work with genuine appreciation. "You deserve to be cherished," he'd written after their first kiss in his car outside her office. "You deserve to be someone's priority." Della had convinced herself she deserved this happiness. Victor's deployments were getting longer. His focus when home was entirely on Emma, and their conversations had become routine exchanges of logistics and updates. She felt invisible in her own marriage, reduced to a household manager rather than a wife and woman. Helen Palmer had noticed the change in her daughter immediately. "You're glowing," Helen had observed during one of their weekly lunches. "New skincare routine." Della had deflected with a laugh, but Helen's sharp eyes had caught the expensive jewelry, the designer handbag, the confidence that seemed to radiate from her daughter's shoulders. "Just feeling good about life, Mom. The nonprofit work is really fulfilling." Helen had nodded, but something nagged at her. Della had always been her pride and joy, beautiful, successful, married to a good provider. But this new version of her daughter seemed different, more self-assured, but also more secretive. Emma, meanwhile, had begun acting out at school. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had called twice in the past week to report that Emma was having difficulty concentrating, seemed tired during classes, and had gotten into an argument with another student over sharing snacks. "Is everything all right at home?" Mrs. Rodriguez had asked during the second call. Sometimes children react to stress in the household, even if they can't articulate what they're sensing. Della had assured the teacher that everything was fine, but privately, she worried. Emma had been asking more questions about when Daddy was coming home, clinging to Della more at bedtime, and seemed to sense the tension that Della thought she was hiding. Stephen had been understanding about Della's concerns regarding Emma, but his patience was wearing thin. "She needs to get used to the idea that her mother has a life too," he'd said during their last dinner together. "Kids are resilient. She'll adapt. She's only 6, Stephen. This is all she's ever known. And maybe it's time for something better. For both of you." Stephen had begun pressuring Della to consider leaving Victor, painting pictures of a life where she wouldn't have to worry about deployments, wouldn't have to be a single parent for months at a time, wouldn't have to pretend to be satisfied with a man who saw her as a convenience rather than a treasure. "I could give you everything you deserve," he'd whispered against her neck in his downtown apartment. "Emma could have a father who's actually present. You could have a husband who puts you first." The idea was intoxicating, but Della wasn't ready to blow up her life entirely. Not yet. She needed more time to figure out her next move, to prepare Emma for whatever transition might come, to build the courage to tell Victor the truth. But time, as Della would soon discover, was a luxury she didn't possess. Helen Palmer had decided to surprise her daughter and granddaughter with an impromptu visit the following afternoon. She had concerns about the distance she'd noticed growing between herself and Della, and she wanted to spend quality time with Emma while Victor was deployed. What Helen would find when she let herself into the house with her spare key would change everything. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Helen Palmer's key turned in the front door lock at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. She'd brought Emma's favorite cookies from the bakery downtown and planned to pick up her granddaughter from school for a surprise afternoon together. The house was quiet, too quiet. Della, Helen called out, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. Emma, sweetheart. Then she heard voices from upstairs. Della's voice, but not alone. A man's voice, deep and unfamiliar. Helen frowned. Victor was deployed, and Della should have been at work. Helen climbed the stairs quietly, her maternal instincts on high alert. The voices were coming from the master bedroom, Della's bedroom, Victor's bedroom, Emma's parents' bedroom. Through the slightly open door, Helen saw her daughter naked in the arms of a stranger. The man was handsome in a polished way that reminded Helen of the car salesman who tried to sweet-talk her over the years. He was whispering something in Della's ear that made her laugh, a laugh Helen hadn't heard from her daughter in months. Helen's world tilted. Her daughter, her principled daughter who'd married a hero, who'd built a beautiful family, was betraying everything Helen had raised her to value. The shock lasted only moments before it crystallized into something harder, colder. Helen Palmer had not raised her daughter to be a liar and a cheat. She had not watched Victor deploy repeatedly to defend their country while some smooth-talking predator moved in on his family. Helen backed away from the door silently, descended the stairs with the careful precision of someone in controlled shock, and left the house as quietly as she'd entered. But she didn't leave the neighborhood. Helen drove to the end of the street and parked where she could observe the house. 43 minutes later, a silver BMW pulled out of the driveway. The same car that had been parked there during 2 of her previous visits, which Della had claimed belonged to a work colleague having car trouble. Helen took photos of the license plate with her phone. That evening, when Della called to invite Helen for dinner that weekend, Helen's voice was steady and pleasant. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to see you and Emma." But Helen Palmer was not a woman who let betrayal slide. Over the next 2 weeks, she conducted her own investigation. The BMW was registered to Stephen Patrick O'Donnell. A few discreet questions to mutual acquaintances revealed that Stephen and Della had been seen together multiple times at restaurants across town, holding hands, acting like a couple. Helen made copies of everything. Meanwhile, Emma's behavior continued to deteriorate. During Helen's Saturday dinner visit, Emma had barely eaten, seemed listless, and kept asking when Daddy was coming home. "He'll be back soon, sweetheart," Della had said. But her attention was clearly elsewhere, on her phone, which buzzed constantly throughout dinner. "Mommy's always texting now," Emma had confided to Helen while Della was in the kitchen. "She says it's work, but she smiles at her phone like she does when Daddy sends pictures." Helen's jaw tightened. The child was more perceptive than anyone realized. That night, after Emma was asleep, Helen confronted Della in the kitchen. "I know about Stephen O'Donnell." Della's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Color drained from her face. "Mom, don't." Helen's voice was ice. "Don't lie to me any more than you already have. I saw you. In your bedroom. In the bed you share with the father of your child." Della set down her glass with shaking hands. "You don't understand. I understand that you're destroying your family for some fantasy with a man who drives a fancy car and tells you what you want to hear. Victor is never here." Della's voice rose, then dropped as she remembered Emma sleeping upstairs. "He's always deployed, always focused on his career, always putting the military first. Stephen makes me feel alive again. He makes me feel valued. Victor puts food on your table, a roof over your head, and serves his country to keep you safe. And this is how you repay him." Della's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for this to happen. It just evolved. You made choices, Della. Every text message, every lie, every time you brought that man into Victor's house, those were choices." Helen stood to leave, her decision made. "You have 1 week to end this affair and tell Victor the truth. If you don't, I will." "Mom, please." 1 week, Della. Choose wisely. But Della Palmer Carlson had never been good at making wise choices when her desires conflicted with her responsibilities. Instead of ending the affair, she doubled down on it. Stephen convinced her that Helen's ultimatum was proof she needed to take control of her own life. "Your mother wants to keep you trapped in a life that makes you miserable," Stephen argued. "But you're stronger than that. You deserve better than living for everyone else's approval." 3 days after Helen's ultimatum, while Emma was at school, Della met Stephen at his apartment. They spent the afternoon planning their future together. Stephen would help Della find a good divorce attorney. He had connections who could ensure she got favorable custody arrangements, and he'd already looked into private schools for Emma. "We can build something beautiful together," Stephen promised. You, me, and Emma. A real family where everyone's present and accounted for. Neither of them noticed Naomi Dawson in the apartment building's parking garage, photographing Della's car next to Stephen's BMW. Naomi had been suspicious for weeks. She'd noticed the unfamiliar car in the Carlson driveway, seen Della leaving the house dressed up in the middle of the day, and observed Emma's increasingly withdrawn behavior during their brief encounters in the yard. When Helen Palmer knocked on Naomi's door that Thursday evening, both women had reached the same conclusion. Victor Carlson needed to know the truth about what was happening to his family while he risked his life overseas. I have photos, Naomi said, spreading them across her kitchen table. Documentation of when she's been leaving, when he's been at the house, timeline evidence. Helen nodded, adding her own evidence to the pile. I have his identity, vehicle registration, and several witness accounts of them together in public. Victor deserves to know, Naomi said quietly. That little girl deserves better than this. Helen picked up her phone. I'll call him tonight. It's morning there. He should be available. But as Helen prepared to dial Victor's international number, neither woman could have predicted the catastrophic event that would unfold the very next day. An event that would transform Victor Carlson from a betrayed husband into something far more dangerous. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. Victor Carlson's satellite phone rang at 0630 hours Kandahar time. He'd just finished his morning workout in the makeshift gym at Forward Operating Base Chapman, sweat still cooling on his skin in the desert air. The caller ID showed Naomi Dawson's number, which was unusual. His neighbor rarely called during deployments unless there was an emergency. Naomi? Is everything all right? Victor, I need to tell you something about Della and Emma. Can you talk privately? The tone in Naomi's voice sent ice through Victor's veins. He'd received calls like this before, calls that preceded news of death, injury, or betrayal. He walked to a secure area away from other personnel. What's going on? Victor, Della is having an affair with a man named Stephen O'Donnell. Helen caught them together in your house, in your bedroom. I have photos of his car at your place multiple times when you've been deployed. The words hit Victor like shrapnel, each one tearing through the foundation of everything he'd believed about his life. He forced his breathing to remain steady, his voice calm. How long? Helen thinks at least 6 months. I've been documenting his visits for the past month. Victor, I'm sorry. We thought you needed to know. Emma. She's struggling. She seems to sense something's wrong, but I don't think she understands what's happening. Victor closed his eyes, his training warring with the rage building in his chest. Send me everything you have. Photos, timelines, whatever evidence you've gathered. I will. Victor, what are you going to do? I'm going to come home and handle this. But Victor wouldn't have the chance to execute any plan he might have made during that phone call. Because at that exact moment, 7,000 miles away in suburban Colorado, Della Palmer Carlson was making a decision that would damn her forever. Della had called in sick to work and was preparing to spend the day at Stephen's apartment. Emma was at school, Helen was at the bank, and Della felt free to lose herself in the fantasy of her new life. She'd packed an overnight bag, told Emma she was working late and wouldn't be home until after bedtime, and arranged for Emma to walk to Naomi's house after school. But Emma got sick during lunch. A stomach bug had been going around her class, and by 1 p.m., the school nurse was calling parents to pick up affected children. The call went to Della's phone first, but Della was already at Stephen's apartment, her phone silenced and forgotten in her purse while she and Stephen planned their getaway weekend to Aspen. The school tried Della's work number. Her assistant explained that Mrs. Carlson had called in sick. They tried the emergency contact numbers. Helen Palmer was in back-to-back meetings with loan applicants and couldn't be reached until after 3 p.m. Finally, they called Naomi Dawson, who was listed as an emergency pickup person. Of course I'll get her, Naomi said immediately. Poor little thing. I'll take care of her until her mother can pick her up. Naomi collected a pale, listless Emma from school at 1:47 p.m. and brought her home. Emma's fever was climbing, and she was complaining of stomach pain and nausea. Naomi gave her children's Tylenol, made sure she stayed hydrated, and tried repeatedly to reach Della. Della's phone went straight to voicemail. At 4 p.m., Emma's condition worsened. She was vomiting, running a fever of 102 degrees, and becoming dehydrated. Naomi was preparing to take her to urgent care when she saw Della's car pulling into the driveway across the street. But Della wasn't alone. Stephen O'Donnell was in the passenger seat, and they were laughing about something, completely oblivious to the crisis unfolding with Emma. Naomi carried the sick child across the street, her anger building with each step. Della, where have you been? Emma's been sick since lunchtime. The school couldn't reach you. Della's face went through several emotions: surprise, guilt, annoyance, before settling on defensive irritation. She's fine, Naomi. Kids get sick. It's not an emergency. Stephen stepped out of the car, checking his phone. Babe, I need to head back to the office. Call me later. The casual endearment in front of Emma and Naomi was like a slap. Naomi saw Emma's confused look as she registered this strange man calling her mother babe. Actually, Della said, glancing between Stephen and Emma, why don't you go ahead and keep her for a few more hours? I have some work things to finish up. Naomi stared at Della in disbelief. She has a fever of 102 degrees. She needs her mother. She needs someone to take care of her, and you're good at that, Della replied with a brittle smile. I'll pick her up after dinner. Stephen was already back in the car, engine running. Della kissed Emma's forehead quickly, too quickly, and climbed into the passenger seat. Thanks, Naomi. You're a lifesaver. As the car pulled away, Emma looked up at Naomi with large, confused eyes. Why didn't Mommy want to take care of me? That night, when Della finally returned at 9:30 p.m. to collect Emma, her daughter's condition had deteriorated further. Emma was lethargic, barely responsive, and burning with fever. She needs to go to the hospital, Naomi said firmly. Now, she's just tired, Della replied, but even she could see that Emma looked terrible. I'll take her home and see how she feels in the morning. Della, she's seriously ill. This isn't just a stomach bug anymore. But Della was already buckling Emma into her car seat, her phone buzzing with text messages from Stephen. She'll be fine. Kids are resilient. What happened over the next 48 hours would haunt Victor Carlson for the rest of his life, and it would fuel a rage so pure and focused that it would destroy everything in its path. Emma spent the night vomiting and running a high fever while Della, exhausted from her emotional day, took 2 sleeping pills and slept through her daughter's cries for help. By morning, Emma was dehydrated and barely conscious. Instead of taking her to the hospital, Della called her mother. Mom, Emma's really sick. Can you come over? Helen arrived to find Emma lying on the bathroom floor, too weak to stand. Jesus Christ, Della. How long has she been like this? Since yesterday. She's just got a bug. Helen immediately called 911, but the damage was already done. Emma was rushed to the hospital with severe dehydration and a kidney infection that had developed from the untreated illness. While Emma fought for her life in a pediatric intensive care unit, Stephen O'Donnell was growing impatient with Della's divided attention. You're obsessing over this, he told her during their phone call that evening. Kids get sick. She's in the hospital, which means she's getting professional care. You hovering won't change anything. She's my daughter, and I'm supposed to be your future. But if you're going to choose her every time there's a conflict, maybe we need to reconsider this whole thing. The ultimatum was clear: Stephen or Emma. Della, exhausted and emotionally manipulated, made the choice that would define her as a monster. She spent that night at Stephen's apartment while her 6-year-old daughter lay in a hospital bed, asking nurses when her mommy was coming. Helen Palmer sat vigil at Emma's bedside, holding her granddaughter's hand and making the most difficult phone call of her life. Victor? It's Helen. You need to come home immediately. Emma's in the hospital, and Della has lost her mind. Victor Carlson's world exploded into fragments that could never be reassembled. But from those fragments, something else began to form. Something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous than the man who had left for deployment 3 months earlier. The husband and father was dying. The weapon was being born. Chapter 5: The Transformation. Victor Carlson arrived at Denver International Airport on a military transport flight after pulling every favor he'd accumulated in 15 years of service. The 18-hour journey from Kandahar had given him time to plan, and the man who walked through the terminal bore little resemblance to the trusting husband who deployed 3 months earlier. Helen Palmer met him at the gate, her usually impeccable appearance disheveled from 3 days of hospital vigils. The exhaustion in her eyes was nothing compared to the fury that radiated from Victor's every movement. How is she? His voice was controlled, professional, the tone he used when receiving mission briefings. Better. The doctor said we caught it just in time. Another 12 hours and... Helen's voice broke. Victor, I failed her. I failed Emma. No. Victor's response was immediate and final. Della failed her. You saved her life. During the drive to the hospital, Helen provided a complete briefing. She'd gathered everything: photos, timelines, witness statements, medical records, and a detailed account of Della's abandonment of Emma during the crisis. She chose him, Helen said, her voice hollow. When Emma was fighting for her life, Della chose to spend the night with Stephen O'Donnell. Victor absorbed this information with the same clinical detachment he used to process intelligence reports. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford. Emma needed him functional, not broken. At the hospital, Victor's composure nearly shattered when he saw his daughter, pale, small, and fragile in the oversized hospital bed, with 4 lines snaking from her tiny arms. Emma's face lit up when she saw him, the first genuine smile she'd managed in days. Daddy, you came home. I promised I always would, baby girl. Victor kissed her forehead, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. How are you feeling? Better now that you're here. Mommy said you couldn't come home because of work, but I knew you'd come if I was really sick. The casual mention of Della's lie was like a knife between Victor's ribs. Where's Mommy now? Emma's expression clouded. She had to work. Grandma Helen has been staying with me. Victor exchanged a look with Helen. They both knew Della wasn't at work. She was with Stephen, maintaining her fiction even while her daughter recovered from near-fatal illness. Emma, sweetheart, I'm going to take care of some grown-up business, and then I'll be back to take you home, okay? Promise. I promise. And you know I always keep my promises. Victor spent the next hour speaking with Emma's medical team, reviewing her treatment, and ensuring her continued care. Then he began implementing the plan he developed during his flight home. His first stop was to Jeremy Schneider, a former Navy SEAL who now worked as a private investigator specializing in military families. Jeremy had helped dozens of deployed servicemen gather evidence of infidelity, and his methods were thorough and legally sound. Victor, man, I'm sorry about this whole situation, Jeremy said, reviewing the evidence Helen had gathered. But what you have here is solid. Your wife abandoned your critically ill child to spend time with her lover. No family court in the country will ignore that. I need everything, Jeremy. Financial records, communication logs, evidence of where she's been spending marital assets, documentation of neglect. I need enough ammunition to destroy her completely. Jeremy nodded. Consider it done. But Victor, what's your endgame here? Full custody. Full custody is just the beginning. Victor's next stop was to Mark Mullins, a divorce attorney with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Mark had handled several high-profile military divorces and understood the unique challenges faced by deployed servicemen. Based on what you're telling me, Mark said after reviewing the preliminary evidence, we can establish abandonment, adultery, child endangerment, and financial misconduct. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but when it comes to custody and asset division, this level of misconduct matters. I want her destroyed, Victor said simply. Legally, financially, socially, I want her to lose everything. That's achievable, but it will get ugly. Good. Over the next 48 hours, while Emma recovered in the hospital and Della continued her fantasy life with Stephen, Victor built his case with military precision. Jeremy's investigation revealed that Della had been using joint credit cards to fund her affair, expensive restaurants, hotels, gifts for Stephen, even a weekend getaway to Vail that she claimed was a work conference. More damaging was the discovery that Della had been discussing divorce with Stephen for months, including conversations about hiding marital assets and manipulating custody arrangements. Stephen had recorded some of their conversations on his phone, presumably as insurance for his own protection, but Jeremy's digital forensics expert had recovered deleted files that painted both of them as calculating and mercenary. The most devastating evidence came from Naomi Dawson's security camera system. Naomi had installed cameras after a break-in 2 years earlier, and they'd been recording continuously. The footage showed Stephen arriving at the Carlson house within hours of Victor's deployments, staying overnight, and even being there when Emma returned from school on several occasions. She brought him into our home, Victor said, watching the footage with Helen and Jeremy. She exposed our daughter to this. Helen's face was stone. I raised her better than this. No, Victor corrected. You raised her. She chose to become this. On Emma's 4th day in the hospital, Della finally appeared. She'd clearly spent considerable time on her appearance. Hairstyled, makeup perfect, wearing a new dress that Victor didn't recognize. She sailed into Emma's room with the confidence of someone who believed her performance would be accepted without question. "There's my brave girl." Della approached Emma's bed with theatrical enthusiasm. "Mommy missed you so much." Emma's response was muted, confused. "Where were you?" "Working extra hard so we can afford your medical bills, sweetheart. But everything's going to be fine now." Victor stood from the chair where he'd been reading to Emma, and Della noticed him for the first time. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally, defiance. "Victor, I thought you weren't due back for another month. Plans change when your child is hospitalized." His voice was conversational, betraying nothing of the storm inside him. "She's fine now. Kids are resilient." The casual dismissal of Emma's near-death experience was the final confirmation Victor needed. The woman he'd married no longer existed, if she ever had. "We need to talk," he said. Privately. Della glanced at Emma, who was watching the exchange with the sharp awareness that children develop when their world becomes unstable. "Can it wait? I just got here." "No, it can't." Something in Victor's tone finally penetrated Della's self-absorption. She followed him to the hospital's family conference room, where Victor closed the door and activated the recording app on his phone. "I know about Stephen O'Donnell." Della's carefully constructed facade cracked. "Victor, I know about the affair. I know about the money you've been spending on him. I know you chose to be with him instead of caring for our daughter when she was dying. She wasn't dying. And you're never here anyway, so don't act like I'm filing for divorce." Victor's words cut through her deflection like a blade. "I'm seeking full custody of Emma, full control of our assets, and I'm ensuring that everyone in your life knows exactly what kind of person you really are." Della stared at him, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "You have one chance to minimize the damage," Victor continued. "Sign the papers when they're served, agree to my terms, and disappear quietly. Fight me, and I'll destroy you so completely that Stephen O'Donnell will run screaming in the opposite direction. You can't do this. I'm her mother. You forfeited that title when you chose your lover over your daughter's life." Victor stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Della? If you contact Emma outside of supervised visitation, if you try to poison her against me, if you attempt to interfere with her recovery in any way, I'll make your life a living hell." "You're threatening me?" Victor's smile was the cold expression of a predator. "I'm making you a promise." As Victor returned to Emma's room, he found his daughter watching the door with worried eyes. "Are you and Mommy fighting?" "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, baby girl. But you never have to worry about me taking care of you. That's my job, and I'm good at my job." Emma nodded solemnly. "Will you stay home now?" "I'm going to try very hard to stay home for a long time." "Good. I missed you, Daddy." "I missed you too, Emma. More than you'll ever know." But as Victor held his daughter's hand and watched her drift off to sleep, he knew that missing her was nothing compared to what Della and Stephen O'Donnell were about to experience. The war was just beginning. Chapter 6: The Siege. Della Palmer Carlson sat in her BMW in the hospital parking lot, hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. Victor knew everything. Worse, he'd seemed almost calm about it, which was terrifying in a way that screaming and accusations never could have been. She called Stephen immediately. "He knows," she said when he answered. "Victor knows about us." "What do you mean he knows?" "Knows what?" "Everything. The affair, the money, that I was with you when Emma was in the hospital. He's filing for divorce and going for full custody." There was a long pause on Stephen's end. "Okay, let's not panic. We knew this might happen eventually. I have a lawyer." "You have a lawyer? For what?" "For situations like this. Corporate disputes, personal matters. He's very good." Della felt a chill of realization. Stephen had been preparing for this scenario, which meant he'd never believed their relationship would remain secret indefinitely. While she'd been living in a fantasy, he'd been planning for reality. "What does this mean for us?" she asked. "It means we need to be smart. Don't admit to anything. Don't sign anything without legal representation, and don't let him intimidate you into giving up your rights." But as Della hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that Stephen's advice was more about protecting himself than protecting her. Victor, meanwhile, was implementing phase 2 of his plan. While Della spiraled, He was meeting with Dustin Webster, a former Marine intelligence officer who now ran a private security firm. Dustin specialized in what he called comprehensive background verification, a polite term for digging up every piece of dirt that existed on a target. Stephen Patrick O'Donnell. Dustin read from his preliminary report. 36 years old, senior account executive at Morrison & Associates Marketing. Divorced twice, no children from either marriage. Financial records show he's living beyond his means. Luxury apartment, expensive car, designer clothes. All funded by credit and a pattern of borrowing against future commissions. Keep digging, Victor said. I want to know everything about this man, his ex-wives, his business practices, his social circle, his weaknesses. What's the endgame here, Victor? Complete destruction. Dustin nodded. I can work with that. Back at the hospital, Helen Palmer was struggling with her own guilt and rage. She'd raised Della to be better than this, and yet her daughter had become someone Helen barely recognized. When Della returned to Emma's room that afternoon, Helen was waiting. We need to talk, Helen said, her voice carrying the authority that had served her well as a bank manager for over 2 decades. Not now, Mom. I'm visiting with my daughter. Your daughter who nearly died while you were playing house with your boyfriend? Emma looked up from her coloring book, confusion clear in her young eyes. Helen immediately softened her tone. Emma, sweetheart, would you like to go see if the nurses have any ice cream? I think they mentioned something about strawberry. Emma brightened and carefully climbed out of bed. Helen walked her to the nurse's station, ensuring she was safely entertained before returning to confront Della. You have lost your mind, Helen said without preamble. And you're going to lose everything because of it. Victor's the one who's never here. He chose the military over his family years ago. Victor chose to serve his country and provide for his family. You chose to spread your legs for the first smooth-talking snake who paid you attention. Della recoiled as if she'd been slapped. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you? That little girl nearly died because you were too busy playing the whore to take care of her. And now Victor, a good man, a man who deserves better than you've ever given him, is going to take her away from you forever. He can't do that. I'm her mother. Being a mother is more than biology, Della. It's about sacrifice, responsibility, putting your child's needs before your own selfish desires. You've failed at all of those things. Helen moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I'll testify to that fact in court if necessary. You wouldn't. Try me. The next morning, Della received the divorce papers. Mark Mullins had moved with impressive speed, filing not just for divorce, but for emergency custody modification based on child endangerment. The papers detailed every aspect of Della's affair, her financial misconduct, and her abandonment of Emma during the medical crisis. Reading the clinical language that described her actions, willful neglect of a minor child, misappropriation of marital assets, abandonment during medical emergency, Della felt the first real fear she'd experienced since this began. She called Stephen immediately. They're painting me as a monster, she said, her voice shaking. They're saying I endangered Emma. Did you tell them anything? Did you admit to the affair? What? No, of course not. Good. My lawyer says denial is our best strategy until we can figure out what evidence they actually have. Evidence? Stephen, they know everything. Victor showed me photos. Photos can be explained. We're colleagues. We work together. We've had business dinners. Business dinners where we were holding hands and kissing? Stephen was quiet for a long moment. How clear are these photos? The question sent ice through Della's veins. Stephen was already distancing himself, calculating how to minimize his own exposure rather than supporting her through this crisis. Stephen, I need you to stand by me through this. We talked about building a life together. We talked about a lot of things, Della. But this situation is more complicated than we anticipated. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we should take a step back until this divorce is finalized. I don't want to complicate your custody situation. The betrayal was swift and complete. Stephen O'Donnell, the man who'd promised to cherish her, who'd convinced her to risk everything for their love, was abandoning her the moment things became difficult. You coward, Della whispered. You absolute coward. Be realistic, Della. If I'm seen as actively interfering in your marriage, it hurts both of us. Once your divorce is final, we can. Della hung up on him. For the first time since this began, Della found herself alone with the consequences of her choices. Victor was systematically dismantling her life, with military precision. Her mother had turned against her. Her lover had revealed himself to be a selfish opportunist. And Emma, sweet, innocent Emma, was asking questions that Della couldn't answer without admitting her own failures. But Della Palmer Carlson had not survived 32 years by giving up easily. If Victor wanted a war, she'd give him one. She just needed to find the right weapons. She started by calling Byron Sosa, a divorce attorney known for his willingness to fight dirty. Byron had a reputation for turning ugly divorces into scorched earth campaigns, and his fees reflected his specialized skills. "Mrs. Carlson," Byron said after reviewing her case, "I'll be honest with you. The evidence against you is substantial, but we have options." "What kind of options?" "Your husband is military, which means he's been deployed extensively. We can argue that his absence created emotional abandonment that drove you to seek companionship elsewhere. We can question his fitness as a single parent, given his career demands. And we can challenge the timeline of events surrounding your daughter's illness." "How?" "Medical emergencies happen. Children get sick quickly. We can argue that you made reasonable decisions based on the information available at the time, and that your ex-husband is using your daughter's illness as a weapon against you. It was a strategy built on lies and manipulation, but Della was desperate enough to consider it." "What about Stephen? Will he have to testify?" Byron's smile was predatory. "Mr. O'Donnell may find that cooperating with your husband's attorney is more beneficial to his own interests than supporting your case." "What do you mean?" "I mean your boyfriend is about to discover that loyalty is expensive, and he strikes me as the type of man who values his own comfort over romantic sentiment." Della felt another piece of her world crumble. Everyone was abandoning her. Victor, Stephen, even her own mother. But she still had Emma, and she'd fight to keep her daughter even if it meant destroying everyone else in the process. What Della didn't know was that Victor had anticipated her desperation and was already 3 moves ahead in the game she'd just decided to play. Chapter 7. The Trap. Stephen O'Donnell adjusted his Italian silk tie and checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror of Morrison & Associates Marketing. He'd spent the weekend thinking about his situation with Della, and he'd reached some uncomfortable conclusions. The affair had been exciting while it remained secret. The thrill of forbidden romance, the satisfaction of taking another man's wife, the ego boost of being chosen over a decorated military hero. But now that Victor Carlson was home and aware, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Stephen had researched Victor online and found a man with commendations for valor, expert marksman qualifications, and a resume that read like an action movie. This wasn't some desk-bound military bureaucrat. This was a trained killer who'd spent 15 years learning how to eliminate threats. Stephen's self-preservation instincts were finally overriding his libido. His phone buzzed with another text from Della. "We need to talk. My lawyer wants to meet with you." Stephen deleted the message without responding. He'd already made his decision. At 11:30 a.m., Stephen's assistant announced that he had a visitor. "A Mr. Carlson to see you?" Stephen's blood went cold. Did he say what this was regarding? Something about a marketing consultation. Stephen considered refusing the meeting, but curiosity and professional necessity won out. If Victor Carlson wanted to confront him, it would happen eventually. Better to control the circumstances. Send him in. Victor Carlson entered Stephen's office like he owned it. He was exactly what Stephen had feared, tall, broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to violence. But his expression was pleasant, almost friendly. "Mr. O'Donnell, thank you for seeing me. I understand you've been working closely with my wife." Stephen's throat was dry. "Mr. Carlson, if this is about—" "It's about business," Victor interrupted smoothly. "I'm transitioning out of the military and starting a security consulting firm. I need marketing expertise, and Della speaks very highly of your talents." The pause before talents was loaded with meaning, but Victor's tone remained conversational. "I think there might be some conflict of interest." "Why?" "Because you've been fucking my wife." The words were delivered with such casual precision that Stephen actually flinched. Victor smiled and settled into the chair across from Stephen's desk. "Let's cut through the bullshit, Stephen. I know about the affair. I know you've been in my house, sleeping in my bed, influencing my daughter. I know about the money Della's spent on you and the weekend trips you've taken together." Stephen's carefully constructed persona crumbled. "Look, I never meant for things to go this far. But they did go that far. The question now is what happens next." Victor leaned forward slightly. Della's lawyer is going to want you to testify on her behalf, to claim that your relationship was meaningful, that you care about her, that you're willing to help her build a new life. We haven't discussed that. But you're not going to do that, are you? Stephen's silence was answer enough. Smart man, Victor continued. Because supporting Della in this divorce would be very expensive for you. Personally, professionally, financially. Is that a threat? It's a business proposition. Victor reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, which he placed on Stephen's desk. My security consulting firm specializes in comprehensive background checks. As part of my preparation for this meeting, I had your background thoroughly investigated. Stephen's hands shook as he opened the envelope. Inside were financial records, dating profiles from multiple websites, photographs of Stephen with various women, and documentation of his 2 previous divorces. Your first wife, Patricia Hoffman O'Donnell, divorced you for adultery and emotional abuse. Your second wife, Candace Becker O'Donnell, divorced you for the same reasons plus financial fraud. You'd been using her credit cards to fund your affairs. Stephen's face had gone pale. Your current lifestyle is funded almost entirely by credit, and you're approximately 6 months away from bankruptcy. Morrison & Associates is unaware that you're using company resources for personal business, including conducting your affair with my wife during work hours and using company vehicles for personal transportation. Victor smiled. Should I continue? What do you want? I want you to disappear from Della's life completely. No contact, no support during the divorce proceedings, no romantic reunion after the dust settles. In exchange, I won't share this information with your employer, your creditors, or the women you're currently pursuing on various dating platforms. Stephen stared at the evidence of his own duplicity. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice. Option 1. You walk away from Della now and never look back. You keep your job, your secrets remain secret, and you can continue your pattern of using and discarding women without interference from me. Option 2. Victor's expression hardened. Option 2 is that I destroy your life so completely that you'll be lucky to find work selling insurance in a strip mall. The threat was delivered without emotion, which made it infinitely more terrifying than any amount of shouting or posturing. How do I know you won't use this against me anyway? Because I don't care about you, Victor said simply. You're a symptom, not the disease. Della chose to betray our family. You just happened to be convenient. Stephen felt a surge of indignation. I care about her. This wasn't just casual. No, you don't. Victor's interruption was final. You care about what she represented, an attractive woman with money and resources who was lonely enough to be grateful for your attention. The moment things became complicated, you started looking for an exit strategy. The accuracy of this assessment was devastating. Della thinks you love her, Victor continued. But you and I both know that if she comes out of this divorce with nothing, no money, no house, limited custody, you'll lose interest immediately. Stephen couldn't deny it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Della and tell her that you can't continue the relationship while she's going through a divorce. You're going to tell her that your lawyer advised against any contact until her custody situation is resolved. And you're going to mean it. And if she doesn't accept that, that's not your problem anymore. Victor stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Stephen, if you change your mind about any of this, if you decide to play hero and support Della through this process, I want you to remember something. What's that? I know where you live, where you work, where you shop, where you exercise, and where you take your dates. I know your routines, your weaknesses, and your fears. And I'm very good at what I do. The message was clear. Victor Carlson was not a man to be crossed. After Victor left, Stephen sat in his office for 20 minutes, staring at the evidence of his own moral bankruptcy. Then he picked up his phone and called Della. We need to end this, he said without preamble when she answered. What? Stephen, I need you now more than ever. My lawyer says I can't have any contact with you while you're going through divorce proceedings. It could complicate your custody case. Your lawyer? You never mentioned. I have to protect myself, Della. I have a career, responsibilities. I can't get dragged into this. There was a long silence on Della's end. When she spoke again, her voice was hollow. So you're abandoning me. Just like that. I'm being practical. Once your divorce is final, once things settle down, maybe we can. No. Della's voice had turned hard. No, Stephen. There won't be a maybe later. You're showing me exactly who you are right now. The line went dead. Stephen stared at his phone, feeling an odd mixture of relief and loss. He'd escaped Victor Carlson's trap, but he'd also lost something he hadn't realized he valued until it was gone. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop across the street from Morrison and Associates, Victor sat with Jeremy Schneider, watching Steven's office window through high-powered binoculars. He took the bait? Jeremy asked. Hook, line, and sinker. Della's about to discover that her white knight is actually a coward in designer armor. What's the next phase? Victor's smile was predatory. Now we let Della's desperation drive her to make increasingly bad decisions while we systematically remove every source of support she might have. And then we finish this. Victor's phone buzzed with a text from Helen Palmer. Della just called me crying. Says Steven abandoned her. She's asking if she can move back in with me. Victor replied immediately. What did you tell her? I told her that adults who make adult decisions have to live with adult consequences. Victor smiled. The trap was working perfectly. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Della Palmer Carlson sat in her BMW in the parking lot of her mother's bank, sobbing with a desperation she hadn't felt since childhood. The last 72 hours had been a systematic destruction of everything she believed about her life and her choices. Steven's abandonment had been swift and brutal. No explanation beyond legal concerns, no promise to reconnect after the divorce, no acknowledgement of the future they'd planned together. He'd simply vanished from her life as if their months together had never happened. Her lawyer, Byron Sosa, had delivered equally devastating news. Steven was refusing to cooperate with their defense strategy and had formally notified Victor's attorney that he would not be providing testimony supportive of Della's character or fitness as a mother. Without his support, Byron had explained, our narrative falls apart. We can't argue that this was a meaningful relationship driven by emotional neglect if he won't acknowledge the relationship's significance. Worse, the financial evidence was overwhelming. Victor's team had documented every expense Della had charged to their joint accounts in support of her affair: hotel rooms, restaurants, gifts, even the weekend in Vail. The total exceeded $15,000 in marital assets spent on adultery. They're also arguing that your absence during Emma's medical crisis constitutes child endangerment, Byron had continued. The hospital records show that your daughter was critically ill for 48 hours while you were unreachable. I had my phone with me, but you didn't answer it. The school called multiple times, your mother called, the neighbor called. You were having sex with your boyfriend while your daughter was dying. The crude assessment had hit Della like a physical blow, but Byron's job wasn't to comfort her. It was to prepare her for the reality of what they were facing. Now, sitting in her mother's parking lot, Della was preparing to beg for help from the one person who might still care about her. She knew Helen was furious, disappointed, and disgusted by her choices, but surely her mother wouldn't abandon her completely. Helen's office was on the second floor of First National Bank, and the secretary recognized Della immediately. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carlson, but Mrs. Palmer is in meetings all afternoon. Please, just tell her I'm here. It's important. The secretary reluctantly called Helen's extension, spoke briefly, then hung up with an uncomfortable expression. I'm sorry, but Mrs. Palmer said she'll call you tonight. The dismissal was humiliating and final. Even Helen Palmer, who'd once loved Della unconditionally, was refusing to see her. Della's phone rang as she walked back to her car. Victor's name appeared on the screen. What do you want? She answered. We need to discuss Emma's living arrangements. She's being discharged from the hospital tomorrow. I'll pick her up. No, you won't. I have temporary custody until the emergency hearing next week. You can't keep me from my daughter. I can and I will. But I'm willing to arrange supervised visitation if you agree to certain conditions. Della felt the walls closing in around her. What conditions? Meet me at Naomi's house at 6 p.m. tonight. Come alone, and don't bring your lawyer. The line went dead. At 6 p.m., Della knocked on Naomi Dawson's front door, feeling like she was walking into an execution. Naomi answered with the cold politeness usually reserved for unwelcome salespeople. Della, please come in. The living room had been transformed into an informal courtroom. Victor sat in one chair, his posture relaxed, but his eyes absolutely predatory. Helen Palmer sat across from him, her face stone. Jeremy Schneider sat at a small table with a laptop computer and several manila folders. Sit down, Della, Victor said, indicating an empty chair that faced all of them. Della felt like a defendant facing a tribunal. Where's Emma? Safe, Victor replied. She's having dinner with a friend from school. She doesn't need to see this. See what? Victor nodded to Jeremy, who opened his laptop and turned it toward Della. The screen showed a video, security camera footage from Naomi's house, time-stamped 3 days earlier. In the video, Della could be seen leaving her house at 1:30 p.m., getting into a car with Stephen O'Donnell, and driving away. The timestamp showed they didn't return until 9:47 p.m., more than 8 hours after Emma had been collected from school by Naomi due to illness. This is the day Emma was hospitalized, Victor said. You left at 1:30 for what you told Emma would be a few hours of work. You returned at nearly 10 p.m., more than 8 hours later. I came back as soon as Naomi called. Naomi called at 1:47 p.m. She called again at 2:15, 3:30, 4:15, and 6 o'clock. You didn't answer any of those calls because you were fucking Stephen O'Donnell while your daughter was fighting for her life. Della recoiled from the brutal language. That's not. Jeremy, show her the next video. The screen changed to show different footage, this time from a camera across the street from Stephen's apartment building. The timestamp showed Della's car entering the parking garage at 2:03 p.m. and not leaving until 9:22 p.m. 7 hours and 19 minutes, Victor said. While Emma was burning with fever and asking for her mother, you spent over 7 hours in your lover's bed. Della's face was burning with shame and rage. How long have you been watching me? Long enough, Victor replied. Long enough to document every lie, every betrayal, every moment you chose your selfish desires over your daughter's welfare. Helen Palmer spoke for the first time. I raised you better than this. Mom. Don't. Helen's voice cracked with emotion. Don't call me that. My daughter would never abandon a sick child for a man who doesn't even care enough to stand by her now. Della turned to Victor. What do you want? I want you to sign this. Victor placed a document on the coffee table between them. It's an agreement to surrender primary custody of Emma to me in exchange for supervised visitation every other weekend. I won't sign that. Then you'll get nothing. Victor's voice remained calm. Because if this goes to trial, I'll present every piece of evidence we've gathered. Emma's medical records showing she was critically ill while you were unreachable. Financial records showing you spent $15,000 of marital assets on your affair. Video evidence showing you abandoned a sick child for your lover. And then, Jeremy added, we'll call Stephen O'Donnell as a witness to testify about your relationship and your stated intentions regarding your marriage and daughter. Della felt a spark of hope. Stephen won't testify against me. Victor and Jeremy exchanged a look that made Della's stomach sink. Actually, Jeremy said, Mr. O'Donnell has already provided a sworn affidavit to our legal team. Jeremy handed Della a document with Stephen's signature notarized at the bottom. As she read, her world collapsed completely. Stephen's statement painted their relationship as casual and physical, denied any discussions of a future together, and described Della as obsessed with the affair to the point of neglecting her parental responsibilities. He claimed that Della had spoken of Emma as an obstacle to their relationship and had expressed frustration that her daughter demanded too much attention. The lies were devastating and strategic. Stephen had painted himself as an unwilling participant in a relationship with an unstable, neglectful mother who'd pursued him aggressively. He's lying, Della whispered. He said he loved me. He said we'd build a life together. Can you prove that? Victor asked. Do you have recordings? Written promises? Love letters? Della realized that all their communication had been through texts and phone calls. Communication that Stephen could easily deny or claim was taken out of context. You set this up, she said to Victor. You made him abandon me. I gave him a choice, Victor replied. Support you through this divorce and face the consequences of his actions, or abandon you and protect himself. He chose himself, just like you chose him over Emma. Victor leaned forward. The difference is, Stephen's betrayal of you is just karma. Your betrayal of Emma is unforgivable. Della looked around the room, at Victor's cold determination, at her mother's disgusted disappointment, at the evidence of her own moral failure spread across Naomi's coffee table. She was completely alone, abandoned by everyone who'd once claimed to care about her. If I sign this, do I still get to see Emma? Supervised visits every other weekend. No overnight stays until she's 18 and can choose for herself. And if I don't sign, then we go to trial, and you'll be lucky to get supervised visits once a month. Plus, All of this becomes public record. Your employer will see it, your friends will see it. Emma will see it when she's older. Della picked up the pen with shaking hands. As she signed away her rights to daily life with her daughter, she realized that every choice she'd made over the past 6 months had led inevitably to this moment. The war was over. Viktor Karlsson had won completely. But as Della would soon discover, Viktor's definition of victory was far more comprehensive than she'd imagined. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Viktor Karlsson stood in the kitchen of his house now, fully and completely, making Emma's favorite pancakes. She sat at the breakfast bar in her school uniform, chattering about her upcoming science fair project and her new favorite book. Emma had adjusted to their new life with the resilience that children possess when they're finally safe. She rarely asked about Della anymore, and when she did, her questions were matter-of-fact rather than emotional. "Will Mommy be at my soccer game tomorrow?" Emma had asked the week before. "No, sweetheart. Remember, Mommy has her own time to see you, and regular time is just for us." Emma had nodded and returned to her homework without apparent distress. Viktor's therapist had explained that children adapt quickly when their environment becomes stable and predictable, and Emma was proof of that assessment. The supervised visits with Della had been sporadic and awkward. Della seemed uncomfortable around Emma now, unsure how to interact with a daughter who'd learned to function without her. Emma, for her part, treated these visits like obligations rather than reunions. "She's different," Emma had told Viktor after one particularly stilted visit. "She keeps asking if I'm happy and if I miss her, but she doesn't really listen to my answers." Viktor had simply hugged his daughter and changed the subject. Della's life had continued its downward spiral after the divorce. She'd lost her job at the nonprofit when the board learned about her misuse of company credit cards for personal expenses during the affair. Her attempts to find comparable employment had been hampered by references who'd witnessed her moral collapse during the divorce proceedings. She'd been forced to move back in with Helen Palmer, an arrangement that lasted exactly 3 weeks before Helen kicked her out after discovering Della had stolen jewelry to pawn for cash. Della now lived in a 1-bedroom apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a medical office and struggling to pay the debts she'd accumulated during her affair with Stephen. Stephen O'Donnell had fared no better. Viktor had kept his promise not to share the damaging information with Stephen's employer, but he'd made no such promise about Stephen's social circle. Jeremy Schneider had carefully leaked details about Stephen's pattern of targeting married women, his financial instability, and his abandonment of Della during her legal crisis. The information had spread through Denver's professional community with the efficiency of gossip in small towns. Stephen found himself excluded from networking events, passed over for promotions, and unable to maintain the social connections that had once sustained his lifestyle. His dating life had suffered similar destruction. Word of his role in breaking up a military family had reached the women he'd been pursuing, and his reputation as a predator had made him toxic in Denver's dating scene. 6 months after abandoning Della, Stephen O'Donnell had been forced to take a job with a smaller firm at significantly reduced pay, move to a cheaper apartment, and sell his BMW to manage his debt. But Viktor's most comprehensive revenge had been saved for last. On a Tuesday afternoon in November, Della received a certified letter at her apartment. Inside was a lawsuit filed by Viktor's legal team, seeking damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress and alienation of affection. The lawsuit detailed every aspect of Della's affair and its impact on Emma, including medical expenses from Emma's hospitalization, therapy costs for Emma's counseling, and Viktor's own lost wages from emergency leave to care for his daughter. The total damages sought exceeded $200,000. Della called Byron Sosa in a panic, but his response was devastating. "These are legitimate claims," Byron explained. "Colorado recognizes alienation of affection suits, and the emotional distress claim is solid given the circumstances surrounding Emma's medical crisis. I don't have that kind of money. Then you'll need to consider bankruptcy. Or you could try to negotiate a settlement, but given what I know about Viktor Karlsson, I doubt he's interested in compromise." Della's call to Viktor went straight to voicemail. When he finally returned her call 3 days later, his voice was businesslike and cold. "You're trying to destroy me completely," she said. "No," Viktor replied. "I'm holding you accountable for the damage you caused. I can't pay this. You know I can't pay this. That's not my problem. Viktor, please. I know I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes, Della. You made choices. You chose to betray our marriage. You chose to endanger our daughter. You chose to lie, steal, and abandon your responsibilities as a wife and mother. I'm still Emma's mother, biologically, but motherhood is about more than DNA, and you forfeited that title when you chose Stephen O'Donnell over Emma's welfare. Della was crying now. What do you want from me? I've lost everything already. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to experience a fraction of the pain you caused Emma when you abandoned her. And I want you to remember, every day for the rest of your life, that you chose this. I could expose you, Della said desperately. Tell people what you've done to me, how you've manipulated everything. Go ahead, Victor replied calmly. Tell them that a decorated Navy SEAL used legal means to protect his daughter from a mother who abandoned her during a medical emergency for an affair with a coward who couldn't even stand by her when things got difficult. The line went quiet except for Della sobbing. You're the villain in this story, Della. Not me, not Stephen, not your mother, not anyone else who's held you accountable for your choices. You are the person who destroyed our family for momentary pleasure, and you're the person who nearly killed our daughter through neglect. Victor's voice became even colder. I will never forgive you. I will never forget what you did, and I will never allow you to hurt Emma again. The call ended, and Della sank to the floor of her shabby apartment, finally understanding the completeness of her defeat. 3 months later, Della Palmer filed for bankruptcy and moved to Phoenix to live with a distant cousin, the only relative who'd agreed to help her. She left behind her daughter, her former life, and the wreckage of every relationship she'd destroyed through her choices. Emma asked about her once. Where did Mommy go? She moved away, Victor had replied honestly. Sometimes adults make choices that mean they can't be the parents they're supposed to be. Emma had nodded solemnly and never asked again. Victor kept every piece of evidence from Della's betrayal in a locked file cabinet in his home office. Not as trophies, but as reminders. Reminders that trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Reminders that some betrayals were unforgivable. Reminders that he would never again allow anyone to threaten his daughter's safety or happiness. Emma Carlson grew up strong, confident, and surrounded by people who actually loved her. Victor, Helen Palmer, who'd remained in Emma's life despite her disgust with Della, Naomi Dawson, and eventually, a stepmother who understood that being a parent meant sacrifice, consistency, and putting children first. Della Palmer Carlson became a cautionary tale told in whispers among military spouses, a reminder of how quickly selfish choices could destroy everything that mattered. And Victor Carlson never forgot, never forgave, and never again trusted anyone with the power to hurt his daughter. In his mind, that was exactly as it should be. Some betrayals are unforgivable. Some bridges, once burned, should never be rebuilt. And some people earn their exile through choices so damaging that redemption becomes impossible. Della Palmer Carlson had learned that lesson in the most devastating way possible, by losing everything she'd once claimed to love for a man who'd never actually loved her at all. Justice, Victor had learned, wasn't always served in courtrooms. Sometimes, it was simply a matter of allowing people to face the natural consequences of their choices while ensuring that innocent children were protected from the fallout. Emma was safe. Emma was loved. Emma was thriving. Everything else was just cleanup. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.